Facilities and Operating Committee meeting. It's 9:02. We have a quorum. Mike, I guess, why don't you start in on facilities and ground maintenance?
Absolutely. All right, so we'll give you some field updates. I know that was a question that was asked last meeting. What do you call it? Diamond had started on the 15th, so they've been here roughly a little over 3 weeks. Even with all the wet weather that we've had, fields are in pretty good shape. We've done some additional work to the fields. We've added clay to the North House varsity softball field. It still needs another load, but it's getting there. It looks really nice. We've added a little bit of clay to the Refson baseball field around the home plate area. We're going to continue to add and mix through the rest of the field next week. Also, the stone dust on the perimeter of the field will be done next week. We're working hand in hand with Diamond and our grounds crew to coordinate everything along with delivery of the material. So next week will be a very busy week working on fields, but everything looks pretty good. I mean, we've had a lot of wet days, as everybody knows, and they're looking pretty good. Refson is definitely still a little bit wet because it takes a little bit time to dry out. We need some sun. We just haven't really had that consistency. We've also groomed the lacrosse field already. The turf has been cleaned, swept. So football field will be next. That should be most likely, I can't say that'll be next week because we have a lot of work going on the varsity baseball and softball fields, but most likely the week after when school gets back in session. That's really all I have for the fields. If you're around and you see them, you'll see that they're looking really well.
Yeah.
We've been working with repairing all the snow equipment and getting all the spring equipment going. That way we're ready to go. Everything's been used. We haven't gone into any kind of lawn mowing yet. It's just not quite there. There's more cleanup, winter branches down, cleaning up leaves and things like that, courtyards. And maintenance for the most part is just continuing on their school dudes, work requests. It's been a little challenging. I mean, it's been nice with the month of March being as mild as it was, but the roller coaster has been a little rough on our heating system. We've had a lot of turn-ons, a lot of turn-offs because we just can't keep the buildings cool with all the main lines full of hot water, whether it's in tunnels or overhead. It just radiates through the building. So we do a lot of turning on, turning off, which I don't like to do, but there's not really an option. We need the heat in the morning and we don't need it in the afternoon most days. So that's really all I have for you for agenda item number 1. You have any questions?
Now, does anyone else on the committee have questions?
No, I don't have any.
You're not.
Okay. Let's move on to, thanks, Mike.
Sure.
Let's move on to the capital budget discussion.
Okay. The one thing that we're aggressively working on, just because of the timing of it and the amount of work that needs to be done, coordination with the different things going on in the schools, is our ductwork cleaning. It needs to be scheduled. That way we have the duct cleaning done before we have any of the floor cleaning done for the summer clean, the deep clean, the re-waxing, the high surface wipe downs. So we put that schedule together. It's not tentative anymore. It's actually a hard schedule. I have the elementary school beginning next week. And so that way the elementary school will be done by the start of school. And with all the ESY and camps, they'll be able to get that building done before we start our summer school. That way, the only thing that needs to be done after the last week of July is just the floor maintaining. So we're going to do things a little bit differently this year with the cleaning crew. We're going to stack buildings as opposed to let the cleaning crews work in widespread buildings. So we'll attack the high school first, come the first day of summer, which will probably be the 23rd of June. So we'll start getting on the high school. That school will be completely finished, and the ductwork cleaning is going to be done in the high school immediately. I apologize. And the cleaning crew is going to be shifted over to the intermediate school. About 9-10 days later, that'll swap. The cleaning crew will head to the high school, and the ductwork and cleaning crew will head to the intermediate school. So this is just the one thing that we've actively had to get on. It's not even just our schedule. We have to get on the American Ductwork Cleaning, Duct and Vent Cleaning of America, because they have schedule too. We're not the only project that they have for the summer. So we've aggressively gone onto this this project even before we've gotten to the actual sign off. Any questions with the ductwork?
No, I think that's pretty clear.
Okay. What do we have? Do you guys have any specific questions with capital?
No,
Giving
it
some
just,
updates.
it was just an agenda item, capital budget discussion. I don't know, Phil, if there's anything else you want to discuss. I think that the capital budget was approved by the Board of Finance as presented, Phil, in the last meeting.
Yeah.
But is there anything else you want to say about that?
No, we're pretty much okay with the capital project. We just wanted to give just an update as to the progress that we're making just for the various projects that we have as outlined.
Okay, the
One thing, Tony, Mike, you might want to bring everyone up to date on what you're doing with the high school old gym.
Sure. I had a pretty good productive meeting with Jack last Friday. We met up at the high school and we went over the 4 air handlers that are going to be rebuilt this year. And he liked the proposal. He just wanted to see a little bit more language written in. That way, when we come to contract and we have a punch list put together right on what was on the contract. He had a couple of additions that he wanted to add to energy management. And he wanted to add some drives, which is just something that'll slow the motor down so they don't have to work 100% all the time. So we're moving pretty good with that. They have straightened out a little bit of verbiage in their proposals, and we'll be able to move forward with that. We'll be able to speak with the building committee and just kind of sign off on it.
okay.
And along with that one, we that would be for the gyms. We also, with the building committee, with Richard and Dave's help, we've gotten some. We've actually gotten somewhere this morning. I finally got some pricing back for about 5 minutes before this meeting started for the last year's capital, which was the window in the nurse's office at the high school and the fire door for the intermediate school. So we got our pricing together for that. I'm just waiting for a schedule. That way we can send it to our 2 construction companies and they can give us an official price for the window. The window is a little bit more difficult to price for the construction companies. And hopefully next week with no kids here, no teachers here, I have a lot of meetings, a lot of walkthroughs just to get all these projects going. Most likely sit down with Richard and with Dave, and we'll go over the cost of the window and just go over the projects. That way there's nothing hidden, nothing missing.
Can I ask a question? I'm the newest member to this committee, so this may be a little bit of backtracking for some of you. But what is our process with respect to RFPs for the smaller projects? For things that are like under $5,000, do we bid those out or do we send them to people that are already working within the buildings? How do we decide when we're going out to an RFP process?
Yeah, so RFP, I do believe that it's anything above 20, maybe a little bit more. I have to double check on the number. But for the smaller projects, what we do for those is that we if we have an existing vendor who we have worked with prior, we tend to go with those vendors. If we do not have a vendor, what we typically do is try to get multiple quotes, so at least we can do an apples to apples comparison with the various pricing that we have. But for most of our projects, for example, with the ductwork and stuff like that, we have worked successfully with a lot of these vendors, so we tend to just do repeat business with them.
Okay. And then we're just relying on them for pricing, or do we have? I mean, how do we know that they're not taking advantage of the fact they've worked with us for, so many years and we like their work and, maybe things start to get padded over time? Is there any way that we have a check on pricing?
So I think with the expertise that we have, and also, generally just working with the building committee as well, if a price seems a little bit, doesn't necessarily pass the smell test, we'll
Okay.
tend to dig a little bit deeper just to just look somewhere else, just for various pricing. This year, probably not as much as before, just because with everything that we have going on and just with all the disruption to the supply chains, and also with the various vendors unable to field staff for these projects, so we tend just to go with a known quantity. But typically what we do, if it doesn't pass the smell test, because we do a vigorous process, both internally and in conjunction with the building committee.
Okay. Thank you.
Phil, you also, for those of on the committee that may not have listened into the entire discussion at the Board of Finance, maybe go through how the duct cleaning will be treated this year versus subsequent years.
Sure. So the duct work cleaning from a pure accounting perspective is not something that is typically considered to be a capital project. It is more so of a general repairs and maintenance project. The Board of Finance did give us a waiver, so to speak, for this for next year or this year, depending on what you look at it, to fund the project. And going forward, we will come up with a schedule, and we will pretty much do a building or so going forward, and that will be a part of our operating budget going forward. Now, in terms of the mechanics, in terms of how this will be paid for, this will be paid for by capital reserve from capital closeouts that we have. We're pretty much reallocating money that we are taking from the larger air handler project at the high school, and pretty much reallocating that to this project and I think one or two other projects.
And the
Okay.
cycle for the duct is what, every 3 years? We'll be doing this again, so we'll just keep building it into the operating budget going
Right,
forward.
roughly every 2-3 years, correct.
Okay.
Anything else on capital budget items?
Not to this point.
Okay. I'm assuming everything else in flight for this year is going as expected.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right. Agenda item number 3, update on Town of West End Optimization Committee. So we had the Tecton presentation to the Board of Ed, and a bunch of questions came up related to the educational pros and cons of each of the configurations. And I brought those particular questions to the Facilities Optimization Committee this week, specifically, focusing on the middle school. What, from an educational perspective, are the pros and cons of each of the options, starting from just fixing things as need be, all the way to adding a new wing and building a new middle school, right? So I think Tecton is going to come back with the answers to that, and hopefully the board can understand what it means to be doing one option versus the other. In addition to that, Melissa, you had a question of, okay, what is the total cost of just fixing things and upgrading things as they, over time? And I think Tecton has a number for that, and they'll be coming back with that as well. And then focusing on the other side of the campus, assuming that town needs Harrowbutt for town space and administrative space for the school, then what are the possible configurations of the bottom side of the campus? Meaning, PK to 1, if we needed to do that, where would that go? And also, really finally answering the question very specifically on why we can't add an addition to WIS. Now, my view on all of this is that we're going to have time as the Board of Ed to go through this, because I think at this point, the Board of Finance, I think, has enough, at least big numbers, low, high, to go back and do some homework on what town affordability is. And so I think we will see, there will be a period of time where the Board of Ed can get those answers, and we can do some of our own work while the Board of Finance actually kind of runs their numbers and figures out what the town could ultimately afford. And third, the town has to also figure out what the town needs are and add it into the overall plan as well, right? So I think there's three things that are going to happen. One is we're going to continue to do our work and understand what all of these options mean from an educational point of view. The Board of Finance is going to do their work on better coming back with what affordability is, and the town has to do their work in determining what exactly are the needs for the town in terms of town space. And I think that's going to take a bit of time for all of that to come together.
I think that's right, Tony. I have received some feedback from members of the community, and it's more to the town part. I'm wondering, are they considering sending out a survey to the town to find out how people feel about any excess space in buildings and the potential use for it? We're talking about obviously the Board of Ed from educational standpoint and optimizing education for our children in the buildings, 21st century learning, but also being as efficient as we can be with our space, so we're not wasting money there. But what about renting out extra space, rec centers, sports abilities, daycare, things like that? I'm hearing a lot about. And it wasn't in the Tecton presentation. There was just always kind of a placeholder when it came to town use.
Right.
So perhaps we can encourage the town to reach out to the general public a little bit more, because I think this is a real opportunity for people that may not be paying attention as closely to have a voice. I think we're hearing clearly a lot from people that are paying really close attention, and that's great. But there's a lot of people that also have valid points that aren't really paying attention. Maybe a survey or something is in order.
No, that's a good point, and you're right. Before we can, even when the town, even when Board of Finance comes back and says, you know what, if we kind of have these, if we kind of look at the model, right, over time of operating expenses, any inflation in operating expenses, what capital plans are, what can we really afford in terms of bonding, that will have to include the work that the town needs to do, work that we need to do in the schools, including the work that we ultimately need to do in the high school. And you have to also remember that, 15 years or 10 years from now, I'm assuming WIS will need some work too. I mean, that just can't assume that there's zero capital expense going into WIS when it gets, older. So I think that Board of Finance has to really create a financial model. And I think that my view is that when they come back, we will go back to the drawing board and be forced to prioritize, right? What we think the most important thing to do is.
Yeah. Okay.
But the Tecton, so to answer your question, Tecton, I believe, has also been hired by the town to look at the town piece, but they haven't started that work yet.
Okay. All right. And what is the cost? What have we spent on Tecton? Have we re-upped, or have they asked for more funding? It sounds like the town is now paying separately. Do you have any idea of where things stand with their
the board? Yeah, the Board of Ed has paid zero to Tecton. And we're not in contract to Tecton. I think that there's we need to discuss whether we want Tecton to actually look at the high school, which would probably make sense at some point. But right now, Tecton has been hired by the town through the FOC. Off the top of my head, I have no idea. I don't think
Okay.
it's re-upped. I think there was just one contract and they're working through that contract.
Okay.
But we can get that from Jonathan Louise.
Okay.
Richard, anything to add?
Yeah, just a little. I think everyone has to realize this is going to be a very long process. And, you know, I was involved with the last school expansion process program. And I had 5 3-inch loose leaf binders with, which I had kept over the years. And this went on from 2001 to 2006. On the meetings that we held and the information we were given. And I had given them to the Historical Society in case anyone ever wanted to do any research. And then I decided that I would borrow them because there was so much misinformation being thrown out to the community that I thought the leaders of the Facilities Optimization Committee should, know what really happened as far as programs and expenses, the last time we went through this. So I've provided, and we had some great financial analysis that was done at that time, independent of the town, but which was presented to the town by Walter Erickson and Teresa Brosco and Mark Buttline. And I gave that to the Rick Bertassi, who's heading the Facilities Optimization Committee, and the 2 members from the Board of Finance, because I thought it was a good template for them to consider using. You have to realize when you look at the old numbers that the project or the original discussion was for projects totaling over $130 million. And it was whittled down to eventually the $80 million figure. Now, what does $80 million mean in today's dollars? Well, I've done some studies and made some inquiries with some major construction companies in the area. And it looks like the cost of construction over the last 20 years has really doubled. So if we spent $80 million in 2001 to 6, we would be spending $160 million for the same building today. So to repeat what Tony said, this is not going to happen overnight. You're going to start off with a figure, and I'm sure with community discussions in that, it will be significantly reduced to a number that the town can live with. But I think it's really important for the Board of Ed and others to come forward when all this misinformation is presented to the community by people who are very active in social media and emails, and say, what you're saying just isn't true. I mean, someone came out and said we spent $80 million on the 3 through 5 school. You didn't spend $80 million on it. It was out of pocket a little over $23 million. So, when that misinformation gets into the community, people just cling to it, and it's not productive. The other thing that annoys me with what I'll call this continuum misinformation is they're accusing the Board of Ed of not maintaining their buildings. And I don't think that's the right label. I think you're maintaining the buildings, but you don't have the money to upgrade them. Mm-hmm. And I think upgrade is a significant feature. When you look at the Hurlbut, in the last go-around in 2001 or that, I came across some documents that said the Board of Ed and the School Building Committee recommended that $10 million be spent on East and South House at Hurlbut. Well, that disappeared from the program. And that would be $20 million in today's dollars, which is, you're probably someone's going to spend a good portion of that to redo those buildings. Whether if you put a senior center The senior center remains in South House. You're going to spend $5+ million on that, the town, and who knows what will be spent on the other areas. So I think you have to emphasize the fact you are maintaining the buildings, but you don't have the financing. You haven't been given the money to do the upgrades that are required in the building. You haven't finished upgrading the different wings of the high school with the mechanical systems and the window wall replacements. You know, you haven't upgraded the old gymnasium to replace the windows and air condition it at some time. And the middle school, we all know, has been ignored since the 70s. So that's really what I have to say.
No, Richard, those are all good points. And, you know, quite frankly, when you look around, there isn't very many people who have that. I mean, some of us have the institutional memory as parents, but I think very few people who are currently involved have that institutional knowledge from the point of view of really understanding the program, what's been spent, what's been done, and what hasn't been done over time. And I think that between now and whenever, you know, at some point in this process, we will have to take a trip down memory lane and make sure that people understand exactly what the history has been, right?
Yeah, it's like we talked the other night, you know, at the intermediate school. In the original program, we were working with the school campus as outlined. When the architects started to work on the design and layout of the football fields and the new school footprint, we didn't have enough acreage to do it properly. And so even though it wasn't in the budget, the selectmen agreed to buy a home that adjoined the school property, which fortunately had been taken over by a bank.
Mhm.
So, you know, it wasn't an issue of throwing a homeowner out. And that was $650,000, which we accommodated within the budget. No additional funds were asked for. But that allowed us to create the footprint that you presently have. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, if you want to even consider, and one of your, I think, board members kept on harping on it, putting the pre-K K1 at that school, you know, you don't have the land, and you really would have to look to purchase or condemn another house, I think, on Parade Ground Court in order to accommodate it. So, Tony, in this way, you know, I think at the last meeting, we took one step forward and 2 steps back.
Right.
And personally, for me, it gets very frustrating, you know, because I'm an individual who likes to have a assignment and go forward with it and do it. And, I think it's time, quite frankly, to get the community together in person and to hear everyone's opinions. I think, you know, you say a lot of things via email and on Zoom that you wouldn't say to someone if you had to look them in the face.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's time to do that. And that will hopefully, you know, expose some of the individuals who are coming out with these irrational assumptions.
Actually, I take a little exception of that last sentence, because we had a in-person Board of Ed meeting, and I got to tell you, it was as
really,
you know,
nasty.
Yeah. Was not as civil as I would have liked it to be. Yeah. But that's right. I mean, we have to have these discussions, and I think you're right. I think that it would be actually very helpful when, you know, someone basically misrepresents what was done in the past, that you can say, absolutely, you're wrong, right?
Yeah, you have to tell them that. I mean, I remember this week, we went through 2 referendums on the last project, and we had a big public meeting. It was in the, I think it was in the cafeteria of the middle school. Woody Bliss was leading it, and people were coming forward making statements. And at one point, I just got up and said they're either misinformed or lying, because you call a spade a spade. That was it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to tell individuals that because they are saying something that's doesn't conform to the the information
Yeah.
and the facts.
Yep.
So that's my 2 cents. So I really think community engagement in person is important. Just get it all out there, because you're talking about really big numbers, and it scares people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Richard's right, and I think we have to do it in a way where people can respond. I think so much of the public comment is just a public comment, and we take it under consider. I mean, I know I do. I listen to everything that's said, and I analyze it, and I think about it, and I incorporate it into the questions I ask at board meetings, and I know everyone on the board does the same thing. But it's different because that feedback isn't given to the person that's speaking if there's inaccuracies or there's questions. So I do think at some point, like back, I think it was, I don't know, Tony, if it was last year or the previous year when we did the budget Q&A, where we had legitimate questions asked and we were able to just sit and answer them, that maybe the Facilities Optimization Committee needs to have a frank, public, in-person Q&A where it's not just comment, thank you for commenting, but actually let me respond.
Yeah, I agree. I think Sam probably has to do it at the select person's level, because I think this is now we're beyond the scope and the remit of the Facilities Optimization Committee. And I think that at the selectmen level, at the Board of Selectmen level, I think they have to drive a broader community conversation about all of our facilities, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Because I think there is a need from the public for wanting to have a two-way communication.
See, the other thing, Tony, which I don't know if I had mentioned it, interestingly enough, when you go through this, the town leadership was pretty smart last time, because they knew there was going to be a significant problem getting these funds passed, approved. And not only did they engage the school community, and we have letters in the files, which from the 3 PTO presidents at that time, endorsing the proposals and the programs. But there was $5 million set aside for Parks and Rec to redo the fields at Bisegli and to build new fields at Morehouse. So you had the group of parents and townspeople who supported the sports activities also on board, because they were getting new fields. So you have to, not you, but the leadership has to work on bringing the different interest groups in town together in support of any large project.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Okay. Well, there's a lot more to come on this.
Okay.
Thanks, Richard.
I will leave you.
Your
You
feedback.
take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, there's so much history that I think everyone needs to understand on this, and we have to get it out there, not only for the schools, but the entire process, what the town went through, what we really spent, what was the history around this. And I think that will really help in this process as well. So let's move to finance. Phil, maybe you could talk about the ever increasing surplus.
Before we talk about the surplus, it's always important, I believe, to always frame whatever it is that we're doing. And I know it feels normal right now, but we have to always remember, we have to look back and say, where were we a few months ago, and how did we start the year, right?
Right.
And when we started the year, we started the year still in the midst of the pandemic, with a lot of uncertainties across the board with everything. So so that's just to frame it, right? We're still in a COVID year. But in terms of just how we typically operate, our financial report has different sections, right? We have our encumbrance section, we have our actual expenditures year to date. We have our encumbrances, which are pretty much very much known and almost guaranteed to be solid. And then we have the softer costs, so to speak, in our anticipated columns. So a lot of the shifts that happen for this month really is just a shift from our operating, from the anticipated section, and pretty much just truing things up. Typically, at the end of the third quarter is when we pretty much just draw a hard line in terms of expenditures and say, please plan accordingly. We need to plan for the remainder of the year. And at that time, we look at the holes, the anticipated holes, and figure out and determine what we need to do with those costs. So we've done that, and that's pretty much what is driving the change in the surplus. So to give you guys an example, last month in our anticipated column, we're pretty much at $2.3 million. This month, the anticipated column is 760, let's say 762. So it's pretty much a shift from that column, and we have pretty much said, hey, we don't think that we will need to spend this money for the remainder of the year. Of course, we still have 3 months left, and a lot could, things could change, and things could change rapidly. But we're fairly confident that there will not be a need for these expenditures that we have released. We're still holding on to some soft costs, so to speak, or soft expenditures, because I don't think it wouldn't be prudent to just release everything. So there's still some give and take that may occur between now and the end of the fiscal year. So that's just the broad view of everything. So I wanted to stop here and just see if there's any thoughts about where we are right now before we kind of dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, Phil, the one thing that, I think it's all about those the line items, basically. I think there's 3 there that are the most significant in terms of change, and maybe we can talk about them, which are salaries, professional services, and then other services, which are probably the settlement line.
Sure.
Okay. So, I think it's all about the details. But I think just from the outside looking in at people that are not, this is important that you went through that, because one of the things that we want to basically make sure that we articulate to everyone, including the Board of Finance, is that we do run a very tight budgeting process. I think this is not indicative of not having a tight budgeting process. This is more indicative, as you said, of still not having a normal year, right?
Yep. No, absolutely. So the change, majority of the change here from salary really has to do with turnover. We're still not 100% staff, and just to give you guys just an idea as to when I say that we're still in the midst of the pandemic, we still have a lot of people. People are still dealing with issues, personally, and just personally, and we have definitely had staff changes, and we have had positions that we at this point, as I said, we were holding on to the money, anticipating that those positions will be filled. At this time in the year, we do not think that those positions will be filled, and that's why we're releasing the money. So this is why you're also seeing a significant increase in the substitute line, because we're saying, hey, we're not going to be filling these positions, all right? So we won't need these hard salaries, but because we will definitely need subs, because we do have teachers who are subbing in various areas, and we do have some paraprofessionals as well who have the appropriate certifications who are also subbing. So it's pretty much an increase in one, so to speak, in terms of a surplus. are an increase and then a decrease, so to speak. Decrease in salaries, true cost, and an increase in the need for additional sub costs. So those are really the main drivers, or the main reasons why we're seeing that shift, so to speak, in the salary line. And again, if you look in our previous months, and you look in that anticipated column, those numbers were always there. Now what we're doing is just a shift, it's just a column shift, so to speak. So that's salaries. Professional services, again, we through our entire budget process, you know, we it's a tight process, and we, at the time when we developed our budget last year, we thought there would be a need for all the professional services that we had. At this point, we're not using as much of those professional services as we anticipated. We have seen increases, of course, in Fed and the various need to use outside services because of our inability to do those services in-house. So at this point, we're pretty much releasing those items that we have in the professional services line. A lot of that is in the technology line, well, in the professional and technical services. You know, we're just not using those services. So we've just released that for this year. Now, the other big, property services. We've done the same thing in the property services category. The property services does include some soft costs for the school in terms of just general repairs. But at this point, again, you know, we have managed to do well this year. We do not have as many breakage or equipment breaking down, so we're not spending as much to repair equipment. In addition to that, so that was $30,000. The next big ticket item was at this time we're reduced the allowance that we have for repairs. We're reduced that by about $100,000. Again, you know, we're still holding on for about $73,000. We're hoping that this will be adequate to take us through the end of the fiscal year. But at this time, we're fairly confident that we'll be okay there. We do have a $58,000 offset to that. As you guys know, we are purchasing water bottles for the school. We've encumbered about $40,000 for that, in anticipation of that need. In addition to that, we have, from our budget mitigating strategy, we did decide to pull the sink replacement at the middle school, and that's now part of our operating budget. That is included in our special projects line with that $58,000. So those are the big ticket items there for property services. The next big one that we have in other services has to do with tuition. So I think a few months ago, I did mention that between our true tuition line and our settlement lines, and ultimately flowing down to our excess cost reimbursement, that the cost of change, right? The cost that we anticipated is not as significant as it was for those lines, and we're getting a less than expected, less than budgeted excess cost reimbursement. We should know within a month or so what that number truly will be, so we'll true that number up. But we did better than we thought we would in our settlement line. And because we did better than what we thought we were going to be in for our settlements, we're seeing that we're not spending as much. We also had a $150,000 reserve, so to speak, that could be used for overall tuition and settlement line. I think at this point, we're fairly confident that we'll not need that 150 reserve. So that's pretty much being released at this time. We're still holding on to about $85,000 in anticipation of something new that may pop up. I do meet with Tracy on a weekly basis, and she's always in some PPT that could go either way. So we're holding on to, for lack of a better word, a reserve in the tuition line. And again, same thing with materials. Everyone kind of went through where they are, and they reviewed their anticipated needs at the end of the year. And we have released $60,000 from our overall materials line. We're still trending a little bit higher for electricity and On the books line, I'm sorry, let's talk about the books. So mitigating strategy for the books, we did pre-purchase books for about $83,000. We did have some money as well in the textbook line. So the net of that is just a deficit of $27,000. So really, those were really the significant change. Another significant change, and it's not so much of a change, it's just a shift in from the anticipated line. So a lot of the times what we have in our anticipated column, right, is we knew that we were going to go be over in some line items, but we know we're going to be over in other things. So we held everything there. Now at the end of the third quarter, we're pretty much, let's say, we're truing everything up, and we're pushing everything out to the projected end to show what the balance will be for those object codes through the end of the year.
Phil, does this include, okay, how does this square with the numbers that were presented to the Board of Finance in terms of what we're using for budget reduction and so forth?
In terms of the surplus?
Yeah.
Right. So what is not reflected here is $140,000 for the ERIP. So if you take the ERIP out from that 894, the surplus, so to speak, is 754.
Okay. Now, so the conversation about the surplus is you could do three things with this. Well, let's assume this is the surplus, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. You could do three things with the surplus. One is the surplus goes back to the town's unallocated reserve balance, right?
Yep.
Second thing is that we create a non-lapsing account to cover next year to cover any unexpected expenses associated with where the surplus came from, right? And the third thing we can do is this year find ways of further mitigating, moving forward on some one-time costs that are in the budget for next year and reduce the budget further.
Sure.
I think that after a brief conversation with Roan, I believe that the Board of Finance believes that it's too late to revisit the budget. So we have two options, right? Which is goes back to the unallocated balance, or we create a non-lapsing account, right?
Correct. I am always in favor of utilizing or creating the non-lapsing account because it truly helps us to mitigate costs. Whether it be in any given current year or just in future years, it truly is a helpful tool. In addition to that, because money has already been taxed, has already been taxed to the taxpayer, it's always beneficial to just keep that into a reserve account. So
yeah, well, the best thing is knowing, if I think in future years we should probably do this exercise a little bit before we make a final decision. The Board of Finance makes a final decision on the budget, because this is money that has been taxed, and so it would be, knowing that there was more would have been really good to pay down some of this one-time cost for next year and further reduce the budget. But I think that degree of freedom is no longer, we don't have that available to us right now.
Right. Right. So, so I'm not quite sure. Then do we explore pre-purchasing anything or prepaying anything at this time? So I'm not quite sure what your thoughts on that, Tony.
I don't know. I'll open it up to everyone, but my thoughts on, we have to be, if we the issue with prepaying.
Tony, you're breaking up. Can't hear you, Tony. Tony did mention that he was in an area where coverage was a little bit spotty. And while Tony is trying to reconnect, just want to apologize. Lisa is currently at the high school. There's some issues that she's addressing at the high school, so that's why she's unable to be here or to join us. Tony, if you're there, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, no, what I was saying is we have to be careful because if you prepay stuff now, we just have to say, that leaves, you're not reducing the budget, so that gives you unallocated money. If your budget is the same and you prepay stuff now, how do you allocate that next year against other things? I
Right.
worry about then you're creating a buffer for next year that we have to actually track. So when you prepay something and reduce the budget, then it constrains everything. So I worry about the rigor of prepaying stuff now and then having this free money floating around next year that we've just reallocated budget to other line items just because we have to make the numbers true up, right? Peter and Melissa, do you kind of get where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
So
What do you
that-
think the best solution is?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of what we do I guess I guess you should come up with a list of things that you could prepay, right? And then we can figure out how to create some guardrails.
When we think of, I think we had, when we think about items, because our budget is the way how it is structured, we don't necessarily have a lot of items in our budget that we can necessarily prepay, right? And this particular one is on me. We do have a financing obligation will be in the final year for next year. If we prepay that, it will have a direct impact to the budget, and that's for about $45,000. Outside of that $45,000, when we think about technology equipment, the plan is that we're going to lease. So whatever money that we pay, you pretty much have to divide that cost by 4 and pretty much assume that that's what it is going to be in terms of a cost savings to the budget. Now, another thought that we had, in terms of items that will not directly impact our operating budget for next year, is maybe some level of payment. I did mention this briefly to Lisa, and she was, she wavered on it a little bit. But after this discussion, right, and I do understand in terms of prepaying it now, creating a buffer for other items, and truly tracking that. I do see that, but we may have some paving that we may need to do. The middle school, the driveway at the middle school is, for the bus loop, is really in bad shape. We may be able to cover that without having to touch the surplus, based on anticipated costs. But I really don't know. I think if we do nothing right now, leave it the way it is, with a budget that's already been set, have the conversation with the Board of Finance, but truly about using this money to establish this non-lapsing account, and then go from there. And Tony, to your point about maybe doing this a little bit sooner, I did contemplate doing this a little bit sooner. However, because of everything that we had going on and all the unknowns, especially with staffing, I didn't necessarily want to just release it and release it too soon. I can see that I may have released it a little bit too late, but that's in hindsight, and we'll definitely make that change for next year.
Yeah. So I think first off, we need that conversation with the Board of Finance, and we need to present options to them with what to do with the excess, and then have that discussion, because ultimately, it's really, now it's kind of up to them to approve what we do with this.
Correct.
It's a little bit out of our hands because the final decision of what we do with this, with the excess, is really going to be their decision. I think we could recommend smart ways of handling this, which we should.
Correct. And I in terms of just the overall budget process, I do believe that we do have a very rigorous budget process, right? But again, for me, I have not seen a normal year.
Yeah.
So I'm still operating on how things were. We have not significantly increased any of our line items, right? A lot of our line items have been flat funded for several years. We've reduced a few line items, but for the most part, we haven't significantly increased our line item. And I think for me, I think this is probably my third year, or second, going into my third year. I have a better sense as to how we operate and what our needs are. So it will help us going into the 23-24 budget cycle, and we'll have those discussions and make the necessary adjustment as needed, right? Because we've gotten better, and we've learned how to manage things in a better way, and how to use the resources that we have to help us to achieve the outcomes that we have. So I think ultimately we're in a good place, and I think the board should just I don't want to say be happy, but we managed a very tight budget, right? We scrutinize our expenses, and it's a very tight ship that we run here.
Yeah. So, and this is not, this is just the top of my head. Just, we did have now it's going to be the third year of operating expenses under COVID, right?
Yes, sir.
And so this is the third year we ran a surplus. It would actually be good at looking at a normal year, and then during the COVID years, what our operating expenses, not budgets, but actually what we spent pre-COVID and then during COVID. I think that'd be interesting information just to understand some of those flex items. I just understand that not the ins and outs, but just broad view on how our expenses kind of mapped out during COVID and then pre-COVID. I think it's information that I think might be useful. Maybe we can glean something out of it to help us in future years. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't want to create extra work, and this is certainly not a priority, but it'd be nice to see our actual expenditures, just to a little bit understand, broadly speaking, when we step back, what our actual expenditures were versus pre-COVID, just to see if we can glean any information out of that to help us in the future.
Tony, are you mentioned that in the aggregate, or are we talking about individual object codes?
I don't think individual object code, but I think maybe major groupings of object codes, just major groupings.
I think that's fine. We have the data available, so we can put that together. Is this going to be a part of one of our meetings, or is this more so along with the budget process? Maybe
at one of the finance committee. It could be done. At one of the finance committee meetings, and maybe maybe a couple of days that you don't tend to be as busy as others, which doesn't happen that much.
Right.
You might want to think about doing this. It's not a priority, but it's something for the future to think about.
Sure.
Maybe we do it when things are quieter in the summer. It's
Yeah, that's fine, Tony. I can put something together so we can just have those discussions. Sure.
Yeah, I don't know how everyone else feels about that. I don't want to create extra work, but it might be interesting to actually look through that.
Not a problem.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah. All right.
And we're good for dental. No surprises there.
Okay. Okay, any other comments or questions before we move to approve the minutes of the last meeting? No?
None from
Okay.
me.
All right, can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the March meeting?
I move to approve the minutes from the March meeting.
Second?
I second.
Um, All in favor?
Aye, Melissa.
Hi, Peter.
Aye, Tony. All opposed? Okay, motion passes. Anything else we should be talking about? No?
Nope.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. And I guess everyone hopefully will have a nice break next week.
Yep, looking
Yes.
forward to that break.
I bet we all are. All right. With that, I guess meeting. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Okay. Second.
I second.
All right. Have a good break, everyone. Meeting
Yes.
adjourned.
everyone.
Enjoy it.
All right.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you.
Okay.